Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Susanna from the Frollo community, and we have a wonderful guest this evening with us. And we're really looking about how to nurture our self compassion. So, really giving ourselves as much kind of care and love as we do to many others. So this session is being recorded, so there will be some time for some questions and answers later on. But without further ado, I will hand over to our wonderful guest, who will talk a little bit more about herself. So I won't steal her thunder at all, and I'll hand on over to you. So thank you ever so much.
Great, thank you so much. Welcome everyone, and I'm Nathalie Kealy, and I am here to really do a bit of I guess, the fundamentals around how we can build more self-compassion. And this, I suppose, is something I'll tell you why in a moment about why I'm drawn to it, and what I've done in my career around it. But since in the last 3 years, becoming a single parent myself, it's even more so built this passion around this idea that we really most of us lack the ability to turn that compassion towards ourselves, even though we're really great at giving it to others. I'm really excited to be, I do this workshop a lot with people, but this is the first time I'm doing it to single parents, and it's just, a cause that's obviously close to my heart. So I'm really excited to be speaking to you guys this evening. So if you haven't already, I mean, you can use your phones, but I would suggest if you've got a paper and pen handy, that would be amazing, just because it's there's a few things that I'm going to be sharing, and it's a lot of me talking. There will be a portion of time at the end for you guys to ask any questions or anything. And as we were saying earlier, if you need to put your hand up or put anything in the chat box or whatever before, as I'm going on, please do. But mostly I'm going to be sharing things throughout, and so because it's quite a lot of information, it's really good way of just not relying on your brain too much and jotting things down that you feel ring true with you or resonate with you, so that you've got it somewhere. And there's a couple of tools that I'll be sharing as well along the way that, again, would be useful to just have somewhere written down. And the process of writing down in itself is something that's really a key fundamental tool that we use when we're looking at self-compassion, because it's that space to be able to reflect on what you're going through, and what you're experiencing and what you're thinking about. So this workshop itself is actually split into 2 parts. So today I'm going to be talking about compassion and how that impacts our guilt and our shame, and a few tools to get us out of that loop. I think probably guilt is something that we all experience as parents, especially single parents. So hopefully that will help. And then part 2 will be more about moving into thinking about how we can really start to use certain tools around our self-soothe system. So starting to really think about how we can enhance and improve our self-soothe system, which in turn really starts to generate more self-compassion towards ourselves. But also, hopefully, the tools that I'm going to be sharing, not only in this workshop, but also the one in January, will be ones that you can also use with your children as well, because obviously we really do want our children to be learning that idea of self-compassion too. So hopefully this is not only going to be something that will benefit you, but also your children as well. So yeah, is there any, I can't see a chat, but I'm assuming there's nothing so far, no questions or anything. Okay. So who I am. So as I said, my passion has always been in self-compassion, but specifically it's been in mental health, and empowering people with their mental health. So I started my career around 12, 13 years ago in mental health, and I've spent that portion of time working in the NHS, building services within children and young people's mental health services. And I currently lead a children's mental health service in the NHS in Portsmouth, where I'm from. But then on the side of this, I've also been, for the last 7 years or so, I've been building a business, and I'm now the founder of 2 companies, Value Your Mind, which is a retreat company, and it offers retreats for individuals to come together as a group, and it's all around your mental well-being. And then also the VYM initiative, which is similar thing, but more trainings and workshops for teams in supporting building compassion in teams, and empowering people with their mental health within those communities. And all in all, the kind of running theme of that is, I really do believe that this idea of looking after our own mental well-being is something that we've been almost gaslighted to believe that we can't do. Obviously, when it gets to a certain degree, we do need to have that support, and that's really important that we reach to the right people for that. But there's a lot of work that we can be doing ourselves to really feel confident in our own mental space, and to feel safe within that. And part of that is creating this kind of net of safety around you. And some of that is the work you yourself do, but also it's about being in communities that support that safety as well. And so, you know, your workplace is a really important place, a community that you can use to enhance that mental safe space for yourself. And so the more these communities are more compassionate and kind, then the more that you've experienced that safety. So yeah, so that's kind of my background. When I'm talking about self-compassion, this is something specific, a specific part of mental health that is really key to empowering yourself around how you can look after your mind and your emotional well-being. The reason that I think a lot of people struggle with it is that there's a couple of things that self-compassion requires, or at least people assume that self-compassion requires, and that is time, and this idea of prioritizing ourselves, which we've been conditioned to believe is a selfish act. And also it can also feel quite exposing. So that idea of spending time with ourselves or on ourselves, if we've been through difficult things in our lives, then that can often be quite an exposing thing to do. You know, it's actually sometimes a little bit easier to be distracted by caring with others or for others than spending that time on ourselves. So I'm sure as parents, that all resonates with you, you know, that idea of prioritizing yourself when you've got so many other people and little people to prioritize, and that idea of time. You know, time is something we really don't have much of. I'm hoping that this workshop and what I talk through in this evening and January, you'll realize that actually that time component is a little bit of a myth. Yes, there's some things that might take time to build that self-compassion, but there are so many things that you can be doing in your day-to-day lives that don't require any additional add-ons or creating any space in your life that, you know, in your lifestyles or your routines that you don't already have. So I'm hoping this will be practical and not feel like something that will overwhelm you and another burden on you, or another responsibility on you, or anything like that. So the benefits of self-compassion, to really kind of buy you into this idea, is that if you imagine, you know, when you give self-compassion to a loved one, like or even a stranger, actually, you know, if you think about how they feel when they, or how they behave when you do that. So a really good example would be what happens when you offer compassion to your child, you know. So they might be distressed or whatever it is, and you go over and you give them a cuddle. You show them some love, you show them some care, you give them attention. You might cook them a nice meal, or you just sit with them, or you ask them how they're feeling, you check in with them. All these little things, these are acts of self-compassion, of compassion, sorry. And so when you do that, you notice that your child, as in this example, they often calm, their nervous system calms down. They maybe appear to seem happier. They might smile. You can sense that they might feel safer in that position that they're in, whether it's, you know, they're in their emotional space or in a situation, whatever that situation is. And they feel more connected. They feel more connected to you as the person that is giving that compassion, but they also feel more connected to the people around them and the world, because the more that they feel safe and loved and cared for, the more connected they just generally will feel with other people. So of course, the same applies to yourself. If you're giving yourself that level of compassion that you're giving to other people, exactly the same thing will happen for you. Your nervous system will calm. You will feel more connected. You will feel like you're able to, you'll feel like you're able to be kinder to yourself, but also therefore to other people. And you'll feel more safe and secure in your own world and more positive about the world. So I think always trying to take that idea of, when you're giving compassion to others, how that feels for them, the same will apply to you. And that's why it's really important that we value ourselves the same amount as we would value someone else, because we do deserve that level of compassion. We do deserve to feel that way. And that's why it's not a selfish act. It's just putting you into the picture. And then I suppose the last thing around that's really, really a benefit of finding more self-compassion is it's an amazing behavior to be modeling to your children. If I come back to that idea of valuing yourself, and if you think of self-compassion being about value, how much value you have in the world, that is what you want to be teaching your children. And that's what we all desire. That's why we want to be good parents. And we're always trying to do the best for our children and get the best out of life for our children, is because we want them to feel valued. And this is something, children, we always want children to feel, but especially in this day and age. I work in children's services, and I can't tell you how much there is out there on social media and things like this that make a child question their value in life. So we really have a job as parents to be trying to balance that out by showing the importance of valuing yourself. And the main way you can do that, because we know with children, they much more than what we say, it's about what we do. And so the main way that we can do that is by role modeling, valuing ourselves, basically. So hopefully that's given you brought you into the idea of why I'm here, and why it's really important to build this self-compassion and really start to focus and prioritize this in your life. There is a lot of science and theory to compassion and compassion-focused therapy specifically, but I'm not going to be going into all of this because it would take me years. What I'm using to draw on, I suppose, in this workshops, it has its backing in evidence-based practices. So compassion-focused therapy is something I'm trained in, a modality I'm trained in. And so I don't want you to, although I am using my personal experiences and I'm using my my background and experiences that I've learned through working in mental health services, I am also using a evidence-based model to support this conversation. So, but yeah, and although what we're going to be talking about today is practice and practical tools, it is also really important to know the science of why compassion is important. So when we're thinking about the process that the brain goes through, and I will say a little bit about this in this workshop, but as I said, if you are interested in this and you're really interested in kind of changing your mindset and changing the way that maybe you process things or deal with things or whatever it is, and any of this has resonated with you, then please do feel free to reach out to me. I do offer one-to-one sessions, and my retreats that I offer are all around self-compassion. So we can delve a lot deeper into this, but hopefully even just doing this will help set those foundations. And there's lots of books out there that I can guide you on and suggest as well. So I'm happy to put that in the chat at the end. So what I want to do is I want to start things off now that I've given you a bit of background by doing this foundation layer. And the foundation layer is checking in. like I mentioned earlier, I spoke about, when you're giving compassion towards someone else, so your child, you might check in with them. You might ask them, how are you? How was your day? This is an act of compassion. But we never ask ourselves how we are. We never really spend that time to check in with ourselves. We wake up in the morning. I mean, and if you're anything like, your mornings are anything like me, I get slapped over the face by my 3-year-old and told, get me some hot milk now, mummy. So there's just not enough time for that check-in. And even in actually preparing for this workshop, I was thinking about that example, and I was thinking, actually, that is something that before I had children, I used to practice this idea of checking in, because I obviously, I'd done self-compassion and the compassion focused therapy, and I knew about it. But I've just let it slide. And so thank you to you guys, because you've reminded me to bring this process back in. And even though that morning is instantly, I'm woken up and I'm told by my toddler, you need to get on with the day, mummy, I can still use that space to do a check-in, and I can also use that space to role model to my daughter what I'm doing. So over the last couple of weeks, when she does wake me up in the mornings, I have said to her, and of course she's 3, so she doesn't necessarily completely understand, but I'm just getting into this practice and using language that in time she will understand, and she will be able to think, oh, that's what mummy does. This is how mummy values herself. And so I've started in the morning saying, I will get up and get your milk, but mummy's just got to do her morning check-in. And the morning check-in is literally just, a minute of me remaining pretending to be asleep, and then just checking in with my body, like asking myself how my body is feeling, and really scanning my whole body, not just thinking about areas where your awareness is naturally drawn to, but thinking about from all the way from your feet up to your head, really scanning, where's the tension, where do I feel good, where do I not feel good, and then checking in with your mental space. And when you get to that space, thinking to yourself, how do you feel? So if you can think of one word to attribute to that feeling, then that's a really good way of identifying how you're feeling. So it doesn't need to be a complicated word or anything like that. It could just be tired or happy or sad or irritable, because your toddler's just woken you up when you didn't, and it's before 6, and so it doesn't really matter what the word is, but finding a way of identifying, and so that you can really acknowledge, how am I feeling right now in this moment? And this isn't for you to then take action on or anything. It's just a simple way to start setting that foundation of checking in, and right from the beginning of your day, taking a moment to shift the priority to yourself, to have some awareness of how you are as a human being. So if with your pen and paper, I would suggest writing that down, because that is something that really I always advise everybody whenever I'm doing this work to start with. And if that's something you're struggling with, doing that check-in, then I would be curious with yourself about why that is, because it's definitely not a time thing, because it isn't something that takes time. So just thinking about whether that's something, if you take one thing away from this evening, whether that's just something that you could bring in. And the other thing to note on all of these things is it's about forming habits. So initially you might think, why am I doing this? Is pointless. It doesn't make any difference. But it's about, in time, that habit will start to embed in your mind, in your psyche. It will start to send signals to the rest of your body, and you will start to feel all of those benefits we talked about in the beginning around being more compassionate towards yourself. So so hopefully that's one thing that you can take away from today. The second thing I want you to do with your pen and paper is, similarly to that idea of being curious with yourself, I just want you to take a moment and think about when you last gave yourself an act of self-compassion. So you don't have to think about what it is. I just want you to jot down, was it 3 days ago, 1 day ago? Was it a week ago, 6 months ago, a year ago? And it might be something really small. It might have been like, I ran myself a bath and I sat in the bath for an hour, or I went on a walk or I cooked myself my favorite meal, or it might be something really big, like, you know, I booked myself a morning spa. I say this because I've literally just booked my yearly morning spa date with my friend. I'm very excited about it. And whatever that is, so just taking a moment to think, when was that last, and be honest with yourself about that. And then once you've done that, thinking about, when did you last give someone else an act of compassion? And that's probably a bit easier to think of, but when you last did that. So it could be your child, a neighbor, friend, when you last did something that was an act of compassion to someone else. And then we'll come back to that at the towards the end. So just keeping that to the side. So as I mentioned earlier, the theory or the modality that underpins what we're talking about here is compassion focused therapy. And this was, I suppose, the brainchild of someone called Paul Gilbert. And he's written, I've got a book on my shelf, he's written a huge Bible about it. Really, really interesting, quite dry though. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, I can definitely share it. But it's not a fun read, I would say. But if you're interested in kind of theory and things like that, it's a great one. So he describes self-compassion, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times, but he describes self-compassion as the non-defensive and non-judgmental attitude toward personal suffering with the desire to alleviate it and understand its causes. So the non-defensive, non-judgmental attitude toward personal suffering with a desire to alleviate and understand its causes. So how I believe that, what that I believe that means is that it's about being receptive to our own needs and accepting and understanding ourselves. The problem is that with the way that our brains work, that often doesn't happen. In fact, usually it's the opposite. So that accepting and understanding ourselves and being receptive to what we want, we really struggle to do. The automaticness of the way the brain works doesn't lend itself well to that concept. And that is why it's really self-compassion is really a practice that you have to keep going with. And that is one thing I would say, is that it's not something where you master it and you're done. You have to keep embedding it. You have to keep reaching for it, because your brain will slowly start to draw itself back to its natural way of being. So you really do have to commit to this idea of being being compassionate towards yourself. And this thing I'm talking about here, about the way the brain works, this is probably one of the most the biggest key themes of working with compassion. If you understand this and that idea of checking in and starting to prioritize yourself, then you've really got that really good core level. So the way, I'm going to give you a bit of science here, so hopefully this all works for you. But basically, the way the brain works, it's evolved over time. And the way it works is to be more self-critical and negative. There's automatic thoughts that happen that sometimes we're not even aware of. And some of you probably have heard of this, because there's a lot of like pop psychology around our inner critic, or our inner voice, our inner critic. So a lot of us have heard this terminology. And in compassion focused therapy, they call it your tricky brain. And acknowledging that this brain, it works automatically. It's not us that's making it become negative. It's not us that's making ourselves be self-critical. This is an automaticness that happens within our own brains, and it's evolved over time, not by us. It wasn't, we didn't evolve it that way. It was designed for us, not by us. And what happens is when that inner critic comes up, when that tricky brain starts doing its thing, we believe these negative thoughts are us, but they're not. That's just the way the brain's working. And what happens then is we start to feel guilty. We start to blame ourselves for having these thoughts, and we create this cycle. And as we're in this cycle, yet more negative thoughts come up. We start to feel more guilty, and we start to feel bad about the way our mind is working. Our self-esteem lowers. We end up feeling hopeless, powerless, and we get into this cycle that is really difficult to break, of guilt and shame. And this process is all what they call the tricky brain, and just acknowledging that is really important. So when you notice that process happening, just acknowledging this is the tricky brain doing its thing automatically then creates an idea of acceptance. So already you're starting to break that cycle, rather than get into that vicious cycle of blame, guilt. Why is my brain doing this? I don't want it to do this, da 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 da. Instead of just straight away popping up, noticing this is happening. Oh, it's my tricky brain. It's not my fault. This is the way the brain works. You're automatically just bringing in that self-compassion and that idea of accepting and hearing what's going on, rather than fighting it and belittling yourself. So I'm going to give you an example. Many of you will probably relate to this. So this is a personal example. So I often have the thought that I'm not a good parent. And it often comes at times when I'm feeling overwhelmed, overworked, juggling too many things. And I tend to be more reactive towards my daughter. I tend to end up shouting more to her, and then I feel obviously terrible. And I feel really guilty. And then with that guilt, my sense of self-worth as a parent lowers. I start to tell myself that I'm not being good enough, and I am not good enough. I try to challenge that thought that I'm having. So that thought that I'm not a good parent, because I think, well, what will my friends say, or my mum say? No, you are a good parent, Natalie. And so I try to challenge that thought. But then what happens is I get into this kind of inner fight in my mind, where I will challenge my own thought by responding with, what my mum or my friend would say. And then my brain would say, yeah, but they're not here. They can't see me shouting at my daughter. They can't see what I'm doing right now. So they don't really know. Like, yeah, okay, they say I'm a great parent, but they don't really see me parent. And then my other side of my brain, my mum in my ear would say something else. And then I would respond, my inner critic would respond with this. And then I'm getting into this huge fight in my mind. My body starts to feel very tense, and my mind does too. And I become completely overwhelmed. And that all comes out more in my behavior and my actions. Whereas self-compassion, if I took more of a self-compassionate approach to that example, it teaches us not to challenge that thought that comes up, because as you can see, that just instead builds this tension and this guilt and da da da. But it's instead to recognize that it's natural that we feel this way, because it's just the tricky brain working. It's just the way the mind works. It's going to respond in this way. And instead of blaming ourselves, we turn our minds to a more compassionate place by recognizing it's not our fault. It's just the way the brain works. Our thoughts are not us. We are not our thoughts. And we step back from that process and allow the thoughts to come up without over attaching ourselves to them. So to understand that, I'll give you the example again with that idea of doing it in a self-compassionate way. So I have the thought, I'm not a good parent. And then I acknowledge instead that it's my tricky brain kicking in. So I'm human. I'm going to have this thought. My brain is telling me I'm not a good parent. That's just the way our brains work. It's true, I don't feel like a good parent right now, but that's okay. I'm tired. I did feel a good parent, however, the other day when Faith and I were at the beach collecting shells, and then I felt like a really good parent. And then I sit there and I think, well, how did that feel? That felt really good, actually. And I concentrate on that image. I concentrate on that image of when I felt like a good parent. I close my eyes, maybe, I shift my attention to that, I take a breath. Remember, sometimes your child is watching you do all this, and it's all great stuff for them to watch. And then compassion floods my brain because I'm remembering, and my mind and my body is remembering this time when I was a good parent. And it comes into my nervous system, and I will look at my daughter and I probably will smile. And then you can even extend the process even further by asking them, if you're using this example. So I'll ask her, do you remember that time when we were at the beach and we were, picking shells or whatever? And that's quite a good way of then using the tool to offer her some of that compassionate imagery as well. So that was quite a big piece of what I was saying. But basically, in essence, you've got to think about those three things. And that is your tricky brain, noticing when that's happening, accepting what's happening, accepting that's your tricky brain, and then shifting the attention. So you're not challenging the thought, you're accepting, and then you're instead shifting the attention to a more compassionate thing, feeling, image. And then you're building on that, creating what they call the compassionate image. And that compassionate image can be extremely powerful. As I've demonstrated in that situation, it can really change your whole behavior from then on and completely shift that pattern from being in this vicious cycle of guilt, blame, all of that, to suddenly feeling like you're in a good place, your self-soothe system is activated, your nervous system calms, you're role modeling something, a really helpful behavior for your child, and you're feeling good. And you haven't done any challenging, you haven't pushed any thoughts or feelings away, no tension has built up in this process. You've simply accepted and then just shifted your mind to a compassionate image, and that's it. And all it does basically is it just breaks this pattern of guilt and shame. And it seems like a really kind of simple thing, and I know it's difficult to do in the moment, but like I said with it all, if you can get into a pattern, a habit of doing it, you will find in time that it becomes more of a easier thing to reach for. Initially, it will feel like something difficult, and that's why I would suggest, writing that idea down, writing those three things down of tricky brain, shifting attention, and creating that compassionate image, because initially getting into that process isn't going to come naturally to you, but in time you will start to notice that it just becomes such an easy thing to reach for. You're not always going to reach for it, because trust me, I've done this for years and I don't always reach for it. I still sometimes get caught in that loop of guilt. And that's just natural. But the thing is when that happens, don't then get more caught in the loop by thinking, oh no, this loop has happened. Think it's okay that I'm getting caught in this loop because I'm just human. And again, you can already start to go back to the compassionate place. So I hope that that's something that's been useful for you all. That's just a little bit of a foundation layer and something to work on over the Christmas break. And before we kind of close to look if there's any questions or anything, I just wanted to come back to that question that I asked you at the beginning. And that question was around, when did you last give yourself some self-compassion? And my assumption is that for most of you, it was probably pretty easy to recall when you gave someone else some compassion, because usually we're just giving our kids compassion all the time. So I'm assuming for a lot of you that would be the case. And I'm probably making also the assumption that you're here because finding moments of self-compassion is pretty tricky. So if it was harder for you to recall a moment for yourself when you last gave yourself some self-compassion, then I want you to consider a time. I want you to consider that every time that you do an act of compassion, that it is in fact an act of value. So I spoke about this at the beginning, this idea of valuing yourself and how much you value someone else. Every time that you give that compassionate act towards someone else, you're saying to that person, I value you. And so you're doing the same with yourself. And if you haven't given yourself an act of compassion recently, then you haven't recently been telling yourself how much you are valued. And you haven't been showing your child how much you are valued either. So if you do have time over the Christmas period, thinking about what little act of compassion you could provide yourself to show yourself and demonstrate to yourself and your child and your mind that you are worth that value, and putting yourself back in the picture. And yeah, I think that's it.
Oh, perfect. Thanks so much, Natalie.
Well,
Okay, so a few people have popped a couple of comments as you were sort of discussing and touching on parts. So
yeah,
I'll go through each one. Apologies if I say the wrong word. I was explaining to Natalie this morning, I've had a severe allergic reaction in my eye and I can't see out of my left eye. So I'm squinting with glasses on and seeing what I can get hold of. So let's go. Okay, so my 9-year-old really pushes me away when I try to give him compassion when he's upset. I need to wait for him to calm down, and I think that's a trait of what they call deeply feeling kids. What's your thoughts on that? Do you feel that what type of thing could we do when children do kind of push us away a little bit, where we're trying to show them compassion, or in this situation where we have to allow the child to calm down before we can even think about giving compassion, and then you're trying to not get yourself very angry in the moment of the child going crazy?
yeah, yeah. And it's not easy to do. um I would say that thinking about that idea of being self-compassionate, you're not always going to get it right. There isn't, you're not going to get everything perfect each time. People don't get it always right with you, do they? They don't always know what to do when you're upset or anything, or you don't get it right with yourself all the time. So first fundamental thing, remembering that we're not starting that pattern of guilt. If you don't get it right, then that's okay. That's absolutely fine. And your child needs to know that actually you are human. So you're not like some kind of robot that is, perfectly conditioned to respond exactly the right way all the time. We're not. And they need to be prepared for that in life, because they're going to get that same feedback from other people, that they're not always going to be able to respond in the way that the child feels in their mind that a person should respond. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing is with compassion, it's not always about being there. So if a child, and children do give us signals. So that idea of pushing away, sometimes they do need that space, just like you yourself do. Sometimes we do need time by ourselves, and giving someone, acknowledging that anyone in your life needs that, is actually an act of compassion itself. I think sometimes we can feel this need as parents that we need to be there caring, but actually giving the child the permission, depends obviously on the age and how much they can be left on their own and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But really, I think just kind of really almost trusting your child's responses, that if a child is telling you that they need that space, acknowledging, okay, I'm hearing you here, like you're listening to them. And that's probably what I mean, I suppose, is that with compassion is about really reflecting and listening and hearing what you need, being receptive, like I said in the chat, and part of that is listening to what your child wants. So if your child is saying that, being receptive to what your child wants. Sometimes they do that and then they want you to come closer. I mean, my daughter's so many times, she'll push me away and then she'll ask me to come and cuddle her, and vice versa. So but yeah, that would be my main thing I would say from that.
Thank you. Um, Someone's put on here, taking the time to be here this evening feels like my act of self-compassion to myself.
Lovely. Good.
Fabulous.
Definitely is.
Oh, sorry. Act of compassion. Last night, my youngest son got upset, totally out of the blue, about a puppy, that had sadly passed away almost 2 years ago now.
Mm.
Oh, and that's hard, isn't it? Something that possibly maybe triggered that to get them upset, and like you say, the 2 year time frame. Sometimes there's no time frame with these things. As single parents, we sort of know that quite well, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that that's obviously the child being, I mean, was that person just reflecting on
I
their,
think so, yeah. I
uh,
think it was, like you say, a reflection to say that
yeah,
they were being
yeah,
compassionate to their child last
yeah,
night.
yeah. And it's lovely to, actually when a child does express that raw emotion, I mean, what an honor it is, isn't it? And a privilege to be able to be the person that your child is trusting with that big emotion. Like that's quite I think we sometimes dismiss that as parents, that's such an honor that they trust us enough to be vulnerable with us in that way.
Another, just sort of like a couple of reflecting comments where it's saying, "Yeah, that's me. I do that a lot." And that was when I think you was talking about parent guilt and saying, "I just need a minute, but
Yeah.
give me a minute and I'll be then." It's like, "Nope, yeah, that's me. I feel guilty all the time." Yeah, I do it all the time was the next reflecting. Um, and then how do you explain to a child that mummy needs a moment in a way that they would understand better? That's tricky, isn't it? Because you always want your child to feel that they can always come to you and you're always there for them. But again, we need just a little bit of breathing space in some moments. What's your thoughts on that, Natalie?
So I mean, there's a couple of techniques and you can use around that. But I am a massive advocate. I feel like there's so much out there that tells us what we should and shouldn't say to our children, and I feel like that detracts from this idea of being really tuning into ourselves and who we are as parents, and our kind of inherent ability to parent. And so I don't like kind of suggesting specific language that you can use, because I think actually what's really important is that you find your own language with your child. So if you feel you need to have some space, which is really important to role model, a bit like I was saying about in the morning, me saying to my daughter, I'm doing a check-in, darling. I'm not going to respond to you straight away. I'm going to have, my minute check-in. That's really important, because I'm giving her a message that I'm taking a moment. But that language is what works for me and my daughter, and it's authentic to that. You doing that, you taking a moment for yourself, is definitely something you should be role modeling to your child. They need to be able to learn that themselves as well. That to advocate for themselves is really, really important part of valuing yourself, isn't it? But what language you use to communicate that, I think, is really up to you. So many people, say use different things, and I really think it's best that you try and think of what feels most comfortable to you. So I often say with parents and children that actually something that can be really useful is actually it depends on the age of the child, but actually having that conversation with the child themselves, of saying, being quite transparent and saying, mummy needs to take time out sometimes, and I need to walk away right now because I'm feeling angry, or I feel like I'm going to shout right now. But I'm not sure how to say this. What word can I use to give you the code, or that I need to step away for a moment? And sometimes the child can actually come up with things like, they might say something random like robot or something like that, but you're giving that compassion to the conversation, and it's always trying to take that approach, that every conversation you have, it's about taking that compassionate approach to it, that there's two people in that relationship. Yeah, and going with that. So I know that's like not a very specific thing, but specific response, but hopefully that helps.
I just wanted to say that was really helpful because that was my question. So
Oh,
I
good.
just thank you, because I don't know what to say, and sometimes I feel like I'm about to blow steam, and I'm like, what do I say? I need a moment. So,
Yeah. How
yeah,
old
thank you.
how old is
She's 3,
three?
and she does have autism, but she's understands what I'm talking about most of the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a little tricky anyway, but I just wanted to know like how I can really kind of approach it. And I guess it's probably good to maybe approach like the two people in the relationship thing maybe when it's not heated,
Yes,
because
definitely.
maybe okay. Okay.
Yeah, definitely strike when the iron's cold.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe also letting her know that she can say that as well if she ever needs a minute or,
Yeah,
you
definitely.
know, feels frustrated. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. And I think especially if she's got autism, that having something that's very clear and specific as like a kind of language word between you guys is obviously going to be really.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just. Sorry, 1 second. Someone else saying that their son's been modelling very poor behaviour, and I want to support them better, like with their mental health.
Who's modeling poor behavior? Sorry, did you say?
Their son.
Their son.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is. I think I mentioned this in the chat, but from working with children and young people, they really, the biggest thing that I always take away from any interactions that I've had, where, because I often see children and young people at the point of crisis, and so there's been a conflict in the home or in a relationship or whatever, and the biggest thing that we notice is that it's a lot about actions. That it doesn't really matter what's being said in a conversation. A lot of the time they're modeling behavior that they've seen. And so yeah, the biggest thing that you guys can do is really model what you feel is healthy, happy behavior, and hope that gives them a good thing to anchor to. And of course they're going to be impacted by other people in their lives and stuff, and we don't have control of that. And again, that's part of that being compassionate towards ourselves, is understanding that we can't have control of everybody and everyone in our child's life, especially when we're single parents. We don't sometimes see maybe who our children are spending time with, but one thing you do have control over is how you behave, or what you're demonstrating as healthy, and happy, and valuing yourself and all of those things.
And I guess as well that comes into play with, there's another few things that are very similar, because a lot of people have said, oh, my teenager's the same. Oh yeah, I have that as well. That a 10-year-old will just shut down when he's upset, and he won't open up at all. And then I often end up getting really cross with him because all I want to do is help. It's very common, that, isn't it? I do
Yeah.
the same, but mine's 9-year-old. I do it with her a lot.
Yeah, definitely. Completely get that. And there is a need in us. I didn't say at the beginning, but there's a lot of research about how I mean, this typically is for women, but we're really, and you see it with women, we're often in compassionate roles in our jobs and things like that. So the evidence shows that women are very good at showing compassion towards others. We're very good at being in that caring role, but we're not very good, and actually worse than men, in turning that compassion towards ourselves, which is interesting, because you think, well, we've got obviously the skills because we can offer it to someone else, but why can't we offer it to ourselves? But I do often see that actually that women struggle because they're so, and this is obviously men as well, but struggle with that idea of being compassion or showing that care by taking a step back. I think that can sometimes feel really hard to do. And so when you're trying to help someone and then they're pushing it away, and it feels really difficult for us because we're used to being the helper, we're used to being the carer, we're used to being, so then to have it kind of pushed away, it feels there's a level of rejection that comes up. And that's very difficult to manage, and a completely normal emotion to have, completely. But again, I would say, noticing that's happening, it's okay, accepting that is normal, that's completely, it's healthy to actually feel that, because the reason you feel that is because you're such a great carer.
And like you say, I feel that then when you are such a great carer, you take everything quite personally when you can't help, or you just want to, or to, it's like, just talk to me, just tell me what's wrong, let me help you.
Definitely.
And then when
reflect.
it's your child and they don't respond back, or they just close down or whatever, it's very hard.
Yeah, and then you get into that pattern, don't you, of I'm maybe I'm not doing something right, maybe I'm not good enough, and that pattern, that example like I was showing you, you can apply that to any situation. It just ends up getting to that point of us questioning, are we a good parent? It usually ends up there.
Yeah, totally. That's everything that everyone said. Generally then, sorry, because I only got half of the message, but I've expanded everything up now. And then it was to follow on from that, was where then they were saying that they feel the same about their son, where they bottle up everything, and they're just very concerned if they don't deal with their emotions, they might end up like their father or the other parent, that then they'll have very poor or not great mental health in that. So I think that's generally a concern, especially where it's so much more heightened and aware out there, that where children, particularly within COVID and everything, all of lots of mental health. I've got a 9-year-old and a 15-year-old, and where they weren't around friends and everything like that, it was so much more difficult. So it's quite hard to sort of pull them away from that to get back into that fun-free living again, essentially, I suppose.
Yeah,
very tricky.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, COVID has had a huge impact on children's mental health, and that idea of role modeling, it's even more so been on the parent, hasn't it? Because the child hasn't been able to turn as much to their other pro-social relationships.
Yeah.
So it's been a really difficult time, and there is definitely an acknowledgement that's needed around that some of that is something that we are having to deal with and manage, and it is tough. Like, there's no changing about it. There is elements that are tough and will be tough. And it's coming back to that idea again, that acceptance, that is the key. You have to start with that. There is a level of accepting that some of this stuff we can't change, and we have to acknowledge that this is part of the culture and the situation we're in right now, with young people. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Nathalie. It's been such an eye-opener and very thought-provoking to allow us all deep carers to be a lot more compassionate about ourselves.
Yeah, I would just say, as a reflection, I've noticed in all of the chat that it's been all about caring about, worrying about our children.
Always.
Always, yeah, which I absolutely am. I am there for. I would probably be doing the same. But if you can take one thing away from this, also think about yourself.
This is the hardest thing. So this is the starting block. So hopefully now, as we did this one before Christmas, as we were talking about, Nathalie, this will allow us to really try and think about more compassion to ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we've already got people saying, really looking forward to the next one.
Good.
So
Yeah.
hopefully this will just be the start to allow ourselves to be a bit more compassionate.
Yeah. And
towards us.
And if it is, if you need a motivation, it helps, because we've got a huge motivation for everything, which is our children. So that's great. I'm just glad that there's a motivation to do it, but do try and reflect on yourselves and what you need, as well as what your children need.
Absolutely. It's the hardest thing though, isn't it?
It is so
Think of
hard.
ourselves. It really is. But thank you very much, and thank you very much for everybody who joined this evening. And the January meetup with Nathalie is already in the meetup section on the app. And this recording will then be put onto the Frollo YouTube channel, and all of Nathalie's social handles will be on there if you want to get in touch with her regarding the retreat and anything else that Nathalie can help you with. All the details will be on there for you as well. And that generally goes up within the next week.
And I've just popped my social handle on the chat as well, if anyone wants it there.
Oh, amazing. Thank you very much. In the actual meetup, it's on there as well as, so that'll still stay open and live for the next couple of hours. But if anybody fails to find it or anything like that, just pop me a little message and I'll get that information sent to you anyway. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nathalie. It's been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in January. So have a lovely Christmas.
Okay.
And I'll see you all soon on another Expert I Am meetup, I am sure. So good evening, everybody. And thanks again, Nathalie.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.